Hey guys, what's going on here? It's Jackson Lohr. Welcome back to the Fitness for Life podcast. Like I said, I'm your host, Jackson Lohr. I know it has been a little while since I've posted one of these episodes, and so I just wanted to hop back on. I do this podcast for free. It's something that I put out there just for those who follow me, those who want to hear information from me, and it's something that I want to do as much as possible, but times like the last 5-6 months or so hasn't been possible. Just based on just how much I've had to do, and how much other aspects of life have taken precedence. So just want to say that and say, thanks to those of you who are still listening. Thanks to those of you who are still supportive of me and, want to make sure that I give you guys something every now and then. My goal here is to ramp these back up again here soon. So that, regular content weekly, if not more, is coming out. And so, yeah. Today, I want to dive into the topic of fall risk, and specifically want to dive into the topic fall risk. We're gonna cover a little bit of bone density, bone mineral density. We're gonna cover why those two have interplay between the two, and this is kind of an expansion of a recent Facebook post I did that I really want to dive into why these things are important. What it means to prevent fall risk, really. And so, yeah, that's what I want to talk about today. We're going to dive right into it. One of the things I want to start out by saying is, like, for the things that cause, degeneration and obviously like death later in life, you have cancer, heart disease, cardiovascular disease, and falls, right? That it's number 3 in terms of, what overall, causes are the large causes of natural death, is what we'll say. And so it's one of those things that it is probably the most preventable of those 3 components, right? Because it's something that we can do a lot for in terms of training, in terms of our nutrition, in terms of just preparing our bodies for it, or for the potential of it, and preventing that, just by the way that we order our house, the way we do things. So that's why I want to dive into it. That's why it's so important, is because it is so high up there on the the list of potential causes of death. And it's not necessarily that, this is something I talked about as well. It's not necessarily that, okay, the fall is going to happen and you're going to break your neck, or the fall is going to happen and you're going to break your femur and bleed out because you severed your femoral artery. Like, no, that's not what we mean when we mean that the fall is the cause of death. It's, this potential of, okay, you break your hip, which the femoral head, the femur, has a high likelihood, especially in women over 60, has a high likelihood of breaking compared to other places on the body. And as a result, it's very, has this high potential for, okay, it may just not heal right. There's not a lot they can do. It may not be to the extent they, want to do surgery, because maybe you're not in the condition to be able to tolerate surgery, whether that's from your heart or whether that's, your muscles, just you don't have enough there for them to be able to work with it and properly do surgery. And, so maybe they'll have you do, if you fall and you have that situation, they'll have you do physical therapy. If it helps, great. They hope that it heals well and you get that function back. Odds are, you're going to end up with a reduced level of function with a fall anyways. And so there's a number of things we can do to really focus on and improve that. And so I want to talk about, the causes, the potential, the ways that we can get into a position where we're at a higher fall risk, and then how to prevent that decline, and that, and how to really, for many people, improve, everything overall as you get into your 70s and your 80s, which is possible. And I want to talk about why and the differences between things. So, talking about prevention first, In terms of prevention, so gonna talk through the concept of sarcopenia. Now, you've heard of probably osteopenia, osteoporosis. So osteoporosis is essentially, it's the two words porosis, pores, or porous, and osteo meaning your bone, porosis, porous, right? So meaning you've got dramatically reduced bone density, or bone mineral density, as some people refer to it. And essentially all that means is that your bones have not been rebuilt over the years properly. And so, you have a reduced density of them, which basically causes them to be more fragile, right? More likely than average to break, which can be a real cause of concern, especially if, it can be especially concerning if you fall and you're worried about breaking maybe more than one bone, right? Maybe a hip, maybe you stick out a hand to brace yourself for a fall and you break a wrist, or lots of things that can go wrong there. And so one of the ways that we prevent that is through our nutrition, right? I'll get into prevention here in a second. Actually, I'm gonna pause that. So one of the ways that we end up in that scenario where a fall is likely is, so I talked about osteopenia, osteoporosis. Sarcopenia is essentially the same thing but happening to your muscles. So it's these muscles are decreasing in size and function to the point where not only am I losing strength, but I'm also losing the ability to move a joint through a range of motion. Specifically, what I'm referring to here is the hips, the knees, and the ankle, to get a proper stride length. And so when we look at a proper stride length, we want that nice 3 foot, three of your own feet is like a minimum distance that we want to shoot for in terms of a good stride length. It's very stable. You talk about in engineering, right? Some of the most stable structures are made of triangular units. So if you look at somebody when they're making contact with the ground and their stride is nice and long, their body kind of looks like a triangle. They're with their two legs kind of going out like this, and making contact with the ground. That makes that triangle. And so, wider base, longer stride length. That's a nice stable structure. If you look at somebody who, kind of shuffles, doesn't have a big, a large stride, they look like they can be tipped over pretty easily. And that's what can happen is, the shorter we make that, each step, the less stable we are as we're walking. And so, the greater the increase of risk for a fall we have there, especially because you're covering the same amount of distance with many, many more steps, if that's the case. So just by the pure number of steps you take, you're going to have to take more and more steps as your steps get shorter. And so just by the number of steps you take, you're increasing the likelihood that, my next step could be a fall. And so, that's one of the things that I think is so important about strength training specifically is, okay, you need to be strengthening your muscles, working through large ranges of motion, especially in the lower body, to make sure that you are not, you are at least minimizing, if not reversing, this sarcopenia that happens so naturally to us. If you've ever seen somebody who's been, in a hospital bed for a week or more, they lose muscle mass pretty quickly, and it's evident that can happen very, very quickly. And so, in terms of really working through that, one of the things I think is really valuable for people to understand about this concept is, yes, our bodies are naturally going to lose a little bit of muscle mass as we age. Pretty much for just about everybody after the age of 40. For men, it's a little later, towards the upper 30s. For women, it's usually a little earlier, towards the lower 30s or even earlier. However, one thing that is abundantly clear to those of us who work with older populations is that this is not necessarily exactly what's going to happen to you, especially if you've not spent much of your life optimizing your muscle mass, optimizing your strength, optimizing those things. So the example I always use is who's a great example for this is Arnold Schwarzenegger. So for those of you who do not know who he is, you've been living under a rock a little bit. That's okay. Arnold Schwarzenegger was originally a bodybuilder, and who became an actor who became the governor of California briefly. And so he is, if you look at him, he's somebody who in his youth, in his 20s and 30s, he maximized in his prime, he maximized the amount of muscle that can be put on naturally. And then and admittedly, went on steroids and different types of performance enhancing substances and maximized the amount of muscle he could put on with those things as well. And is considered, perhaps the best, the greatest of all time in terms of bodybuilding. And there's reasons for that, his awards and accolades, obviously. What I use him as an example of is, as he ages, beyond the age of 40, he's going to lose that muscle mass no matter what he does. He's not going to be able to gain muscle mass because he's optimized his body's ability and his body's total potential for gaining muscle. Beyond his genetic potential because of the performance enhancing substance use. And there's nothing inherently wrong with that. He might be one that I don't know. He might be one that went too far with it. I don't know. But that is something that clearly he is the example of somebody who will continue to decline in terms of his muscle mass, his strength, probably even his mobility. And so, but because he's at such a high level, it's okay. He's still going to be above the average person in all those aspects for most of his life, if not all of it, because he has optimized that. And so for somebody who gets to their 50s, 60s, 70s, or even 80s, and I'm not excluding the 90s or even above there, but if you get to that point and you've never really trained hard, you've never really focused, done focused work on muscle building, on, really doing intense mobility work and stretching and those things that really challenge the body to adapt and cause it to adapt. If you've not done those things, there is window to improve because the body has sort of set within it these genetic ceilings. And what I like to say is, yes, obviously, if you're not training those things, you're going to see a decline because that's how we age naturally. But if you've not reached that genetic ceiling, then there is a potential that your potential declines, but your training is going to come up to meet that decline. And so you won't truly begin to drop off in terms of your ability to adapt until you've come up to meet that ceiling. And so what I always tell people is two things. One, you can improve for a long, long time, especially if you've not, there is no too late to improve. There is, it's not that it's too late. Now, I'll give an example. I have a client, if I've had a client that I've worked with who was in his late 80s and had recovered from a stroke within, the last 2 years before we started working together. And he still saw improvements in some things, but stagnation in others. And for somebody at that stage to see improvements, beyond what his previous function was prior to the stroke is phenomenal. It shows the body's resilience, both to aging, and to injury as well. And so that's something that's worth mentioning. But at another point, his words were, hey, I see it as a win now, even if I'm going downhill or even if I'm just stagnating because it's preventing me from going downhill, or it's preventing me from going downhill faster, from seeing that decline as fast as some of the people around me, some of my friends. This is somebody who on the phone we're talking, and every other week it's a different funeral he's going to. And so that's the other component to it is, not only can you progress, but you will also drastically reduce, if not almost eliminate, that rate of decline for quite some time. And so that's the other component that I think is really, really important. When it comes to preventing fall, like obviously we want strong, we want to be strong. We want to be able to move well in order to prevent falls. The component of preventing, what I will call physical fall prevention, which is you want to set your home up in such a way that, okay, I'm going to minimize, how many wires I have, loose things on the ground, how I'm going to minimize, how many different lips I have to go over, whether that's different. I want to make sure I have good mats, in the shower. I want to make sure I have, hold bars where I need them, use railings where appropriate, all these different components to it. And I will say, as we get older, making sure that, pets are well trained. I'm not a big proponent of having many pets. The older we get, just because of, that potential risk. I hear it all the time of, dog or cat got under my feet and I lost my balance because I, couldn't, maintain, just didn't want to step on them or didn't want to hurt them. It's like, yeah, your cat will recover. Your 2-year-old cat will recover if you accidentally, step on their leg or their tail or whatnot. You might not. And so that's something to consider as well, is, how many pets do you want to have at that stage? Are you willing to put their life ahead of yours? And maybe you are, and that's a decision you have to make for yourself. But kind of moving into the practical side of prevention. So what I always tell people in this conversation is you have to understand the concept of Wolff's Law. And Wolff's Law essentially says this, is that the forces we place upon our body, upon our bones and our body will respond in kind by laying down more denser tissue to be able to absorb those forces and to be more resilient to the forces we place upon them. If you look at, and a great example of this is if you look at like world's strongest man competitors, powerlifters, oftentimes they have tissues that are much thicker, much more dense than the average person, especially their spines, right? So their backs, their lower legs, their pelvis are incredibly dense compared to the average person. And that's because for years and years and years, they've placed way more force upon them than the average person. And so their body has then laid down tissue, has laid down more dense, more resilient structures. Their bodies have adapted to the stresses that they have placed upon them. A great example that I'll give that, I saw firsthand when I was working as an athletic trainer at Liberty. We saw one athlete had had one of the tendons in his foot sliced. That was a year where we had a lot of ice skate cuts that we saw, and it was great to see those things and learn a lot from them and the rehab that went along with them. Obviously not great for the athletes. You never wish that on anyone. But for me, it was a real learning experience, and I got to see some of these things in real time. And we actually, me and the team physician, we actually missed that we saw that the cut had happened, but we missed that one of the tendons had been completely severed in this. It was a smaller tendon, smaller, less, we'll say less important tendon, but it did have a function. And probably 2 weeks went by after it had been sewn up and stitches had been taken out and that sort of thing. Not the tendon, but the skin on the outside of the foot. Comes back to me and says, it doesn't feel quite right. So got a second opinion. Turns out, yep, tendon severed. after a period of time like that, what happens with those tendons is they're not as these tendons will tend to shrink because they're not getting as much blood supply. They're not getting as much use. It's like they atrophy without use. And so if they're not repaired properly, quickly, a lot of times they'll shrink, shrivel, and lose their usefulness. And then it's no point to repair them. You might as well just remove them at that point. So we go to see this other physician, and he says, you know what, I'm going to do my best. We're going to do surgery. We're going to try and see. We're going to go in there and see if it's even worth trying to attach. Now, keep in mind, this is somebody who's been playing ice hockey all their life. And if you know anything about ice hockey, your ankles, and this is where the tendon was located, your ankles are required for everything. And it's a lot of force through those ankles. And the doctor came back, post surgery and said, I was able to fix it. I can't believe how thick that tendon was, and he was shocked. And so that's a great example of Wolff's Law. The body will lay down tissue where it requires the most force to be absorbed and the most force to be produced as well. And so that's what we want when it comes to building muscle, building dense bones. That is why two things become very important. One, well, I'll say three. Okay. So one being living an active lifestyle. If we're sitting on the couch constantly, all of our tissues are getting weaker and reducing their density. And so living an active lifestyle, whether that's picking an active hobby. I like pickleball, especially for this age group, because you can find competition at any stage, beginner, intermediate, advanced. And you can play, I can play as a 28-year-old against a 70 or 80-year-old. And if, depending on the person, they can make it competitive. They can, beat me being 50 years older than me. And that's fun for me, fun for them. That's why I like it so much. But it's also active. It's, the more active we are, the more force we're placing on our bones, whether it's walking, running, no matter what. If we are resisting gravity consistently and doing that more so than sitting, then we are going to be improving especially our lower body bone density. So that's one thing. The next thing is, resistance training, and I say heavy resistance training. And essentially what I mean by this is a type of training with weights. It doesn't have to be, specifically machines, specifically free weights. It's whatever you're able to do that, challenges and puts lots of force through your body, really challenging you. And so that, okay, it might I might really struggle to make 3, 4, 5 reps of this exercise. But that's what's going to do me best in the long run. And so, and progressively loading that further, meaning over time, I'm going to either do more reps or I'm going to do, and then I'm going to do more weight. And over time, I'm really going to try and build that up to whatever I can find to be my maximum capacity for this. And so that's something that is tremendously important. I cannot overstate the importance of that when it comes to not only preventing the fall, but also preventing the break and the things that can reduce your function after a fall, can make it impossible for them to do surgery, can make it, can make physical therapy ineffective afterwards. That sort of thing. And the other component I haven't talked about is the component of, if you have a lot of muscle tissue in your hips, in your leg, in your, back, and in your arms, you can actually, that acts as a cushion. There's something in between that's spreading out that force over a larger surface area and really reducing the potential for injury there. And so that's something I think is also valuable. But the third component, so we talked about living an active lifestyle, having things where you're walking, you're running, you're jogging, you're moving on your 2 feet. We talked about resistance training and that being a integral part of what you're doing. And then the third component is, also having what I'll call plyometrics. So There's a lot of ways to do this. You can do it through, and it's kind of a type of resistance training, but you can do it through simply increasing the pace. So plyometrics is essentially what I'm referring to is more power training. So taking a resistance training exercise and increasing the speed at which we do it. And what that can look like, the simplest form that can look like, I think, is I'll use the squat, for example, is taking a body weight squat, and maybe I've been used to going slow on the way down, coming up at kind of the same pace, down and up, down and up. What I might do to make it more of a plyometric, to bring some speed and some power to that and get my body used to that, is to take, okay, I'm going to go 3 seconds down or 2 seconds down all the way to the bottom of my squat, and then I'm going to boom, pop up with as much speed as I can tolerate with whatever weight I'm using. And using maybe I'm using a slightly lighter weight in order to do that. And I would advise, starting out with using a slightly lighter weight if you're going to do that. And so that's something that I think a lot of people discount. They don't do as much of. And it's something that can be really important. And you can take that from, okay, getting used to, boom, I'm popping up, to maybe now I'm practicing going down fast. So boom, and then absorbing that and then coming back up slowly. Boom, I'm absorbing that, coming back up slowly. And I can take that into, okay, maybe now I'm going to skip if I feel comfortable doing it. And, that's kind of a gentle, rhythmic, lots of force going into the ground, absorbing it quickly and popping back up. Maybe now I do a little hops, hopping in place. And again, lots of force going into the ground. And I'm getting my body used to producing force quickly, which is great. And producing a lot of force, quickly. And so types, you can continue on into that progression of, different types of plyometrics, but plyometrics are going to be something that I really, really use to, really, really emphasize to reduce that fall risk, and to keep your bones nice and strong, and your muscles nice and strong. One thing, another thing I want to leave you guys with, and I want to get towards the end of what I'm talking about here, is when it comes to one thing that I like to do, and this is kind of a preference, but also, just something that can be helpful, is getting used to the sensation of falling using some sort of slider exercise. I'll give you an example. My client Susie, who's been on this podcast before, has shared with you all before. One of the things that we have done, to kind of get her used to the sensation of losing her footing, losing her balance, are slider lunges, and we do them, move forward and reverse, which is basically, we have a little slider. They cost like $10 on, you can use like a furniture mover kind of thing. They cost like $10 on Amazon, and you can, you put your foot on it, holding onto a railing either beside you or in front of you. Slowly let your foot go out as far as you're comfortable going, and then coming back. And essentially what we're doing is reducing the friction. So if you have like a linoleum or a hardwood floor, you can use a towel on the ground and do the exact same thing. So long as one foot is very stable, and you have something you can hold on to, it can be a very safe way to get used to the sensation of falling and get your muscles used to reacting quickly against that reduced friction, to bring things back into equilibrium, into balance. So that is an exercise that I think is really worthwhile for people to know, that I think I use a lot with these types of clients. Another thing that I think is worthwhile knowing and worthwhile working on and progressing, specifically, is kind of this get up and go exercise, which is essentially, if you place two chairs maybe 10 meters apart, facing each other, or just place a chair and an object that you're going to walk around. So you're going to sit down in the chair, then you're going to time it. You're going to, as soon as you get up, click stopwatch. You can use your phone, and you're going to walk as fast as you can around that object and come back and sit down. And essentially that can be a good baseline. You can understand, okay, how fast can I get up, walk to a place, and get back? And that can be a good understanding of, okay, what is my fall risk? Because, am I good at moving quickly, moving precisely, and sitting and standing and sitting again. And so that's one of the things that can be really valuable. And what you can do is just over time try and increase that speed at which you're doing that. So okay, I'm going to practice getting up, moving, sitting back down, and that's a good measure of overall what does my ability to move look like. Hopefully you guys got something out of this. I kind of ranted for a little bit there, got into a couple different aspects of fall risk, understanding it, preventing it, reducing it. If you guys have any questions, please shoot me a comment, shoot me a message. You can reach me at Jackson Lohr at Facebook, or fitnessforlife_Jackson on Instagram. So thank you guys for listening, tuning in, and I hope to see you guys next time.